Well, hello, everybody. Hope you got your repast here, your cup of joe or your cup of tea. Yeah, tea, Ceylon, right? They now call Sri Lanka. It was actually, I didn't think I was going to say anything about this, but it was Sir Lawrence Oliphant's father who introduced the tea plant into Ceylon or Sri Lanka. So in celebration of tea, we'll keep moving here. So today is a very, very special day. Of course, every day is special, but we have our friends, across the pond here with Reverend David, and I'm just digging up something here. I thought I was going to have it, but it's not where I thought it was. Aha, here it is. But the 6th of December, it's the feast of Old Saint Nick. And so that's a really good thing. I think the first thing I'd like to do is have someone with reverence before their name give me some of his impressions of Saint Nicholas of Myra.
Well, good afternoon to you, my good friend and our viewers. I'm hot foot and reverberating. I'm directly back from our Metropolitan Community Church Oasis Yule celebration, so I'm still tugged up in my collar. We had our second service of worship and celebration today at Benham Community Church, the Kalos Centre, which is our new home. They're partnering with us, which is very, very generous, and things are working well there. Even under the eternal lockdown system of Britain, which has to really go. Gosh, St. Nicholas, what an interesting guy. I don't like theological thugs, personally. Anyone that goes around beating up other people isn't exactly what I think is a saint. Sainthood for me, right, we're all, remember, free church, so we're all priests. We're all saints, technically. Therefore, I don't dislike the Catholic and Orthodox idea that there are people somehow ahead of us in that great journey along that great route. I tend to see it myself in terms of expanded consciousness, received grace. I think those two concepts are intimately interwoven, curiously, and that by the blessings of the Spirit, someone has taken and discovered a wider view of life. Therefore, my view of the saints tends to be rather ascetic, or sort of deep scholars like the rather chubby Thomas Aquinas, who, of course, was the ox of learning because he was so fat amongst other things. I'm not as fat as him. Rather like G.J. Chesterton, of course, although he was busy. But clearly Aquinas was floating through the aether quite literally sometimes. So that's my idea of a saint, someone who's achieved much higher vision and vistas, as opposed to someone that just sticks up for church doctrine and goes around biffing other people because they don't go along with it. So I love St. Nicholas as the foundation of the Christmas story. In other words, the foundation of the Santa Claus story. I love all that, love all that, love all that. Yule, obviously I don't mean the sacred Christmas narrative. I mean one of those charming traditional tales that surrounds the Yuletide, which we mustn't abandon. But no, I mean, I'm sure he felt he was doing the right thing, but if he felt that was a way to win an argument, he was going about it the wrong way and probably picking on the wrong person. I mean, if he'd have come in my direction, he'd have found a bunch of ecclesiastical fibes back in his direction. So good luck to you, St. Nicholas. The legend makes you a much nicer person than you actually were in practice, but God is merciful, and I'm sure everything will work out in the end. Also, I don't really like attacks upon different types of Christianity, which he was prone to. You caught me on a strange day, John. Halfway through the service, I suddenly thought, oh my God, am I still a Unitarian? Oh my God, after all these years, am I still a Unitarian? Which, of course, is a theological view. You can be a Trinitarian or Unitarian in any denomination. Although it is a denomination, strictly speaking, you don't have to be in that denomination. Because I've always found that the sort of Hebraic, the Abrahamic idea of the one God, the one Godhead, the one ultimate point of reference, the one source of everything, existence, everything. I find that an absolutely intoxicating idea. And it started me reading Spinoza many years ago, the God intoxicated man, of course, as his friends called him, who was a man I realized I could do business with. He got, of course, his enemies said he was an atheist, but you're looking at Wittgenstein again, two of them, the biggest religious atheists in human history, if they were atheists. I mean, come off it. So he basically, Spinoza got thrown out of the synagogue for atheism. In other words, he was thinking about what he wanted to say and looking at scripture very deeply, but it seemed to get in the way of the money, rather like the church. I'm on very familiar territory with people who get thrown out of large institutions. So certain people in Holland were frightened it would get in the way of the money. And of course, his sister took him to court the minute he'd actually been thrown out of the synagogue and tried to win their family's inheritance. And as the story goes, that this is the measure of a good man. He won the case and then gave her all of the family property. That's a good man. That's a good man. He then, of course, converted to Christianity and became, instead of Baruch Benedictus, which of course is the Latin and Christianized version of that name, and then got thrown out of the church because, again, it was all to do with free thinking and discovering the spirit and getting in the way of money again. So we're back on very familiar territory once more. And this good-hearted individual went on to become, of course, one of the greatest and most seminal philosophers of Western history. He earned his career as a glass grinder, a lens grinder. The only thing that makes me think there was more to him than meets the eye, well, two things, if I'm honest. Most mainstream Muslims don't tend to be too kind to certain types of Jewish adherent. It was the Aga Khan that actually admitted that that Spinoza was a mystic and had seen God. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. That's very interesting. And also, I don't know, I'm struggling with examples here, to be honest. I'm trying to think of the other best example. So the Aga Khan says it, and the fact his writings veer towards placing, his publisher, put it this way, placed a rose when the Ethics was first printed in Holland. But as anybody knew in those days and in that society, the rose meant a Rosicrucian. So was he really delving into stuff he kept very, very quiet as this moral giant, which would fit in, of course, with the esoteric history of Amsterdam as it was in those days? Oh, John, I wish I was Dutch. Why can't I be Dutch? Why did the angels make me British? I'd be much happier as a Dutch guy. Living in Rembrandt van Rijn's old flat, I mean, that would suit me to the ground. Anyway, so enough of belligerent saints. I'll pass it back to you. Great to see you as always, and I hope this Sunday's treating you well.
Well, yeah. So I'm going to make sure something first. Yeah. So you can hear me, correct? Okay, good. So we get into Old Saint Nick, and that's a great story because traditionally, the tradition of Saint Nick is Santa Claus came here from Holland, and it's Sinterklaas. Although I'm sure I'm not really good at saying with a Dutch accent, but in that tradition, they have the figure that travels with Saint Nick is this guy, Zwarte Piet, and his face is, he's said to be black, and he's a Moor, right? And that children are told, his face is blackened with soot because he climbs through the chimney to deliver gifts for Sinterklaas, right? And so it's a controversial figure, because some people say, well, that's racist. But then, is it racist to have soot on your face because you climbed down a chimney? I don't know, but it's an interesting relationship between the United States and the Netherlands. I mean, first of all, most people don't even know that the central corporation for all corporations is in the Netherlands. So now that you know that, and if you register your company and you pay your little fee of $15, they get their cut. That's an interesting relationship, because it really came here through New York, and of course, New York previously was called New Amsterdam, and it was really a prominently Dutch city, and it's very intimately related. In fact, I haven't checked lately, but I remember years ago I did an investigation just to see who had the most holdings of real estate in the United States. And lo and behold, it was the Dutch at that time. Who knows what it is right now, but they've very quietly maintained their relationship to the empire concept through the mechanics of banking, and which is interesting, because that ties them into this whole theme we're talking into, in a way. I mean, if you follow it down, because the symbol of the Lollards, which were the bankers, was the 3 gold balls. And of course, now we know that the 3 gold balls, if you see that, it means a pawn shop. And if you take that symbol of the 3 gold balls and you bring it back to St. Nicholas, well, that's the symbol of St. Nicholas, is the 3 gold balls. And it makes reference to the fact that there was a guy who was wealthy, lost his money, and he had 3 daughters, and he had no money for a dowry. So it appeared as though they were doomed to live a life in the streets, just fending for themselves through prostitution or whatever, And so it's said that St. Nicholas went by his house and threw a bag of gold coins into the window, and the father found them in the morning and used those for a dowry, and was able to marry his eldest daughter. And he did likewise after the marriage of one. He would throw coins again. So for all 3 daughters, they got a bag of gold coins, and were able to marry and be saved from that life. And so there is this kind of nexus having to do with the whole idea of mammon, and because you got this figure coming down the chimney and bringing you gifts. So it has something to do with that, the whole material consequence of one's relationship to the world. And but there's a higher level, and you shouldn't mistake stories for truths in the historical sense necessarily, because sometimes they're just proving to be fodder for a lesson, a life lesson. Because I do remember through my familiarity with a guy named George Radanaya, who was a Russian Orthodox priest who was imprisoned and found a little single lecture on the Our Father by Rudolf Steiner, and that became his kind of rudder or keel, even when he was in that situation. And it was given to him by one of the other people there, and he read that over and over and over and over again. And Rudolf Steiner gave over 6,000 lectures, and more than one of my mentors in the world of Rudolf Steiner's work has told the story of that you'd be better, of Rudolf Steiner saying you'd be better off reading one lecture 6,000 times than reading, encountering all of them. Something to that effect. Obviously, he didn't say that because the archive hadn't gotten to that point. But the idea is trying to encompass all of his work it's a superhuman task, basically, because when you look and you see that he dealt with all of various disciplines, whether it be architecture or education or medicine or just straight up science, European studies, and you go, and it depends on what you want to do. I mean, there's people doing eurythmy, which is a form of dance, centered around anthroposophy is also Bodmer gymnastics. It's a particular gymnastic method. I mean, I could still go on and on. A good glass cutting, sculpture, watercolors. And so there's all these arts. There are things that you do in the world. And Rudolf Steiner was very much into the concept of redemption through art. And that you have interesting because in the tradition of the lodges, there's always like art and science are the two of the pillars that you look at. But when you get into that kind of thinking, it brings you to a figure like Johann Wolfgang von Goethe and his particular volumes that are associated with what you might call initiation. Two of the principal ones is the 2 volumes of Wilhelm Meister's Apprenticeship and Travels. And the first part's the apprenticeship and the second part is the travels. And because see, Goethe had a very imaginative relationship to his views on education. And so consequently, when you start looking into it and what Rudolf Steiner has said about this, it brings you to the very much to the initial concept that we started with, and it had to do with reverence. See, and in Wilhelm Meister, Rudolf Steiner points out the fact that Goethe pointed towards the symbol, enlivening the symbol, and in a particular lecture on that subject, Rudolf Steiner talked about Goethe's description of the 4 reverences. And why, one of the reasons why I'm bringing this up, David, is because on the picture that we use every week with the 2 pews on it, one of those figures has his arms crossed, and he's in a position of reverence, yes, right? And being that you're a reverend, I thought that's fitting. I put that on your side, see, and so in Wilhelm Meister, Goethe gets into reference for the spiritual world, of course, first of all, and then reverence for the physical world, that you should be grateful of all you receive from all the various creatures and the whole world itself, and then a certain reverence for other people and realizing that this is a spiritual being and becoming before you. And then out of these 3, one can develop a proper reverence for oneself. And Rudolf Steiner makes the point of that, although most people usually only, they skip the first 3 and go to the 4th one and just end up with reverence for themselves. And so that's that containment of the light, because it's, if you look at the distortions of personality that can happen as a result of the arrogance and vanity, and arrogance is born out of ignorance ultimately, because were somebody truly informed, then they would just be in a sense of wonderment, were they to be aware of how much is going on their behalf. by other beings, and so that reverence is due for more than oneself. But it changes the cast of your consciousness, basically. And there was a nice quote today that was dug up from the Rudolf Steiner archive by Piero Camerinices, anthroposophist, and it's a Rudolf Steiner quote. It's very apropos. A true knowledge of the human being loosens the inner life of the soul and brings a smile to the face. Sour and grumpy faces come from lack of knowledge. So I can only wholeheartedly agree. And if you get into Rudolf Steiner and you like examine his greatest achievement is of course the representative of mankind, and it's an image of the Christ, and below him is the Ahrimanic dark spirit of materialism, like Satan, and then above him is the prideful being of Lucifer. But then above the whole thing, at the very top, there's the spirit of mirth, and that whole idea, be of good cheer, in the holidays. Although the blue meanies are trying to put masks on our face and prevent us from seeing each other's smiles, smile anyways. You could be surprised how much you could smile with your eyes, and it's that ultimate being able to take a lemon and make lemonade. And but when you get into this, and you discover like the means, like one time I was discussing with some gentleman. I was at a barbecue at a friend's house, and it was 6 years ago or something, 7 years ago, and I started talking about the deep state and all this stuff, and he says, I find what you're saying very interesting, but you're smiling. And my comment is, well, I don't derive my happiness from this world. I mean, if you depend on this world to be the source of your happiness, good luck with that, because it will definitely go cyclical on you. And as the poet Novalis said, paradise is strewn everywhere, right? So there's something, exactly what you need exists in this world, but it's not where you are. It's somewhere else. And so there's this limiting of space and of time that puts constraints on us. And when you delve deeper into that, and that's what leads you to this reverence, because it's that awesome countenance. So don't be so tough on Saint Nick, because George, I started talking about George Radanaya, and I got off on about 9 different tangents. But George Radanaya was a Russian Orthodox priest. As I said, he did go to imprisonment for a period of time, but he got ran over by the KGB, and he was taken to the hospital, straight to the morgue, and put on ice, and they couldn't get around to him. So he laid there for 3 days, over 3 days. And at the end of 3 days, they were going to do something with him. And then they noticed that he moved, and he had returned. And with fascinating experiences that he had on the other side. One of which was, he said that when I was on the other side, the ones that could communicate with me were the babies that were coming in, because it was a hospital and babies were being born, and that he would communicate with the spirits of the babies. And the one baby that he was communicating with while he was on the other side was crying because the child was in pain, and the child had let him know that they had like dislocated the leg, I guess, when they did the delivery, and the baby was in pain. And so he told, when he came to, he told them, oh, by the way, there's this baby, and they went and they checked it out, and it was true. There was this baby with this dislocated leg, and they reset the leg, and then the baby stopped crying. And but George Adonai, one of the experiences that he had of a super sensible nature was that Saint Nicholas appeared to him as a spirit being, a visible spirit being. And it's very interesting because Saint Nicholas is one of the most venerated of the saints within the Orthodox tradition. And he's patron saint of sailors and patron saint of unfortunate people, and so he's an interesting character. And when you start getting into what you were saying about sainthood, I couldn't help but thinking, when you talk about, say, for example, St. Thomas Aquinas, the dumb ox of medieval philosophy. We're this, what did Albertus Magnus said? Yes, but were this ox ever to speak? And Aquinas he wasn't didn't have so much the gift of gab so much as he had the gift to be able to write. But the only one who could read his writing was Reginald Piperno, his associate, and it was Reginald that would transcribe his writings. And but Aquinas, he became so transformed through the path of knowledge that he pursued in the Summa Theologicum. And in there specifically, the second most quoted book next to the Bible was the works of Dionysius the Areopagite, who we've made reference to many times here because he was the first bishop of Athens. And the tradition of Dionysius was that school of esoteric Christianity, because Dionysius was the disciple of St. Paul, and he was converted, and Dionysius was the head of the school. And at the Agora, and Agora, which is a Greek word which basically means without darkness, right? So it's the marketplace. It's where it's not dark there. They got lights on. And so, but it has an interesting meditative quality nonetheless. But see, with Aquinas, he had, toward the end of his life, had to go to the Inquisition to be questioned about his writings, and he never made it there. He was traveling, and I guess the legendary story, he hit his head on a branch of a tree while in a mystic reverie, and so he never was able to get to the Inquisition. And historians, some say that had he made it there, he probably would have been condemned, because he would have, toward the end of his life, remember, he was saying his writings were as mere straw. That was after he got to the point to where when he would perform the Mass at the cathedral, that he would start to levitate and they'd have to pull him back down on the ground. So yes, there are beings that there's different levels at which a being can become transformed. And it's what's called an esoteric Christian stream, the mystery of economy. And that's that if a saint or an initiate or an adept even perfects of one level of their being, because you have your physical, etheric, astral, ego, and that's your basically the 3 degrees plus the 4th degree, right? And all true mystery schools, that's their natures. They're all constructed from what is a human being, say. And if they get into all these other numbers, they're just extrapolations, because it's in 3 degrees really that the physical, etheric, and astral are overcome. Just as, like, for example, you have the teachings that were given out regarding these vehicles within the lodges of the 3 degrees. And it was through encountering his initiation. And mind you, Rudolf Steiner made the point that, well, what someone like Goethe would get out of Freemasonry is vastly different from what somebody else might get, right? And of course, I'm paraphrasing, I'm not directly quoting. But the point is that whole idea of being able to with understanding, approach the world of symbols. And Rudolf Steiner was very critical of people that used the symbols, but they didn't give the meaning, because the symbols would still go into your etheric body, but it would be on an unconscious level. And so you want to come to consciousness. You want to, that's that waking state. That's what the mastery of this fourth world is to be able to be awake, right? And the awakening okay, here we are, we're awake on the physical plane. When you start waking up in the world of dreams, to where you have conscious dreams, where you're in a dream, you're in a dream, right? That's just the beginning of awakening within that world. So and then you have deep dreamless sleep, and then beyond that, trance. So those are the three preceding states of this waking consciousness: is trance, deep dreamless sleep, and then sleep. And the previous existence before the earth came into being was a dream state, right? And so in being able to come to relationship to these ideas, he makes the point of that when one goes into the world of dream, one comes into relationship to the angels, the archangels, and the archai, three of the Dionysian system. The angels, archangels, and archai represent the beings that you can come into relationship in the world of dream. Beyond that, it's in between incarnations more directly. And the one who can exist in both time and space, and in the world of duration beyond space and time, that's the God of the Old Testament. That's the realm of the exousiai. They're capable of working in both worlds. And that's what you're talking about with that one God concept. It centers on that because the source, according to the esoteric Christian view, is that our direct relationship is to that moon Jehovah being, because that's the genesis of the human form, and the whole chain of events, starting with Adam. So when I made comment to this, oh, by the way, hi, Roseanne. The other day when I was on Roseanne Barr's show, she said hi to you too, David. And but we made mention of some of this. They're talking about that Adam, he named everything, right? Because he knew the primordial language. Yes. And so all the animals and everything, he named everything. And that's that primal language that's referred to in the Bible as the language that existed before the Tower of Babel, right? Or Babel. Some people call it Babel, like Babylon, and on and on. And so there's this whole idea of this, that's the second mystery of number, and the sixth mystery of the word, that they come together. That's from old sun, in the way in which it's recapitulated by the future Vedas period. And so that might be a bit of a riddle, but that's okay. That's all we're here to do, is just create riddles. Right, David? And so with Saint Nick making his appearance to George Radhanaya, and he said it was like a flashing, powerful thing. It just put him back. And so we shouldn't get too carried away with having thoughts about some of these stories that we hear that might turn it to a negative sense, because it's kind of like archetypal initiation language sometimes only. It's not necessarily historical. And so that don't worry, David, they're not going to leave you a piece of coal for Christmas.
This year, I'll be lucky to get anything for Christmas with the state the British economy's in at the minute. Oh, do you know, you've alerted me to two things. I think one of the winning formulas of this show is that you're the mystic and I'm the embittered Christian existentialist. So I think I've suddenly put my finger on the winning formula of this show. Oh, and I'm sure I've just upset all my Russian friends. I've had a go at St. Nicholas. Look, I love him. Okay, I love St. Nicholas. Yeah. I'm sure he became more post-mortem than the moody bugger who kept punching people in this life. I'm sure he became more than that. You know, I mean, let's hear it for St. Nicholas. No, I mean, I suppose what I was getting at was I'm very cautious these days of people who've been given sainthoods, because of course some people bought them, which is a question of historical fact. They were such stinkers in this life, they bribed the church with a large sum of money to make sure they became saints in the memory of the church. And some people were made saints for political expediency. I actually find them a bit more worrying. And of course, you get people who were actually saints, like St. Francis of Assisi, who people don't want to talk about much because there's no money and no power involved, and you're just looking at a really nice guy with a very healthy spiritual life. So, you know, all that is going on at the same time. We're throwing books around at the minute. So I've been going through this one again. Which, of course, is my other Bible. I mean, Schiller is one of those people that just gets me thinking and thinking and thinking all the time about various things. And, you know, what we can do. I mean, curiously, I was reading Schiller. I'm in the process, thanks to your influence, Mr. Barnwell, of rejoining the Anthroposophical Society in Britain, which has, again, ignited a number of problems in my checkered history, my checkered religious history. I was reading Schiller the last time, many years ago, I hasten to add, to a performance in their wonderful theatre. There's a gorgeous Art Deco building in London I want to take you to one day, which is Rudolf Steiner House. I mean, it's absolutely lovely. And all the rooms are sculpted perfectly and the acoustics are perfectly. And I love the theatre. And I saw one of the worst performances of Eurythmy I've ever seen in my life at the Rudolf Steiner Theatre. Simply because they got the idea, and this was years ago. Remember, I haven't seen anything down there recently, and I felt it was a shame because they were doing something by formula instead of by innovation. Now I know enough about Rudolf Steiner to know he wouldn't have liked that. And they got the color that right. This is the dramaturg in me coming out. This is the dramatist. They got the colors right. The color coordination was right. They got the staging right. They got the props right. But it was still one of the most boring things I've ever seen in my life. And they were still, you know, all these weird views by modern theatricals of previous theatricals. You know, when they adopt these weird voices for no reason whatsoever, and so it lost me after the first 10 minutes. And I made an excuse to leave at the intermission with somebody saying, "Reverend, are you going? Oh, my knee, oh, my back, oh, my knee, I'm sorry, I can't." Oh, so there was all that going on as I escaped as quickly as possible. That's not the fault of Steiner Eurythmics, of course, or that style of theatre, which I want to explore myself next year. I'm putting on this one-man show, as you know, on Beowulf, the art and drama of Beowulf. And at the moment, it's at a place called the Horse Hospital, starring me. At the moment, it's at a place called the Horse Hospital, which is this sort of radical experimental venue in London. I've done some work before, but really I'm still aiming at Steiner House, because I'd like to, after all these years, say, look, all of these things really are dramatically, you know, in revolution. They're really trying to say things that weren't done justice to back in the day. And, you know, we've got to stop trying to recreate the time of Rudolf Steiner and look more at what he was trying to do in that time, because then you end up with genuinely revolutionary theatre. In terms of, we talked, I like Fatty Aquinas. As everybody seems to know, I'm becoming the reincarnation of G.K. Chesterton, whether I like it or not. But I rather like Fatty Aquinas. I mean, yeah, the last mystical experience, and he wouldn't have got through the Inquisition. It's perfectly clear they'd have got him. You know, basically his last mystical experience. So yes, he's achieving higher consciousness. was when he said the remark you made. You know, all of his writings are like straw in the fire. I mean, right, that's a man on the verge of other types of manifestation. I mean, that's extraordinary. Curious, I was talking to my other half a bit earlier today about the concept of the supernatural, which of course is a big no-no in modern academia nowadays. You're not even allowed to talk about cause and effect anymore, which I think I've talked about before. You know, you've got to talk about process tracing. You know, bugger you. There's such a thing as cause and effect. There we are. Because you weren't paying enough attention to process tracing in the past doesn't mean it takes precedence. But every time I go to Rome and think of the great saints, Aquinas included, who, as I say, wouldn't have got through the Inquisition, I go and visit the statue of a man that certainly didn't. On the outskirts of Rome, there's a wonderful statue of Giordano Bruno, who, of course, is not only one of the biggest free thinkers in the history of science, and, of course, who wrote as a philosopher, not a theologian, in which case he shouldn't really have come to trial. It was the theologians, the theologists, that worried the church to death in case they had any free thinking. And so he, of course, was very careful to say all the way through his career, look, I'm writing this as a philosopher, which did no good whatsoever. I mean, they tricked him into, look, Father Bruno, come to Rome and we'll sort it out. So, of course, the minute he gets within the boundaries of Rome, they arrest him and there's a mock trial. He finds himself burnt to death a couple of days later. So every time I go to Rome, which isn't as much these days, sadly, I always go and pay my homage and respects at the base of the statue of Giordano Bruno, because the history of mathematics needs him, and so does the history of philosophy. Ash Wednesday Supper is one of the most brilliant books I've ever read. And it's about time to forgive and forget. I think he's still on their prohibited list. You know, get a life. You know, get over it. It was centuries ago, and he was proved right. There we are. So I'm not a big fan of the Inquisition, because they'd be after me. I mean, they'd be after me as well with half the things I say and do. Oh, John, gosh. The supernatural. I mean, I'm someone interested in Christian existentialism. I mean, I like Paul Tillich, who of course is a German and an American who went to America because he was. Some people say he was afeared for his life in Germany. I probably think that's true in his case, because he really wouldn't let certain elements in Germany off the hook. I mean, his theology is brilliantly insightful. I promise I'll finish in a minute. But I mean, his problem for me is that he has abandoned the struggle, right? Since the supernatural it can't have any reference points to our space-time. Okay, point taken. Therefore, we can't discuss it at all. Well, the answer is no, 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 and no. You know, he's just said, by saying you can't discuss it at all, you're discussing it, right? So I always liked Gabriel Marcel, who's this haunting French presence on me, and a layman, of course, who wrote The Philosophy of Existence, forced Jean-Paul Sartre to admit you could have such a thing as Christian existentialism. I bet Sartre never, ever forgave himself for admitting that, but he did. And you get this incredible view with Marcel that you can have those concepts, but you can't do what they did in the Middle Ages. You know, you stubbed your toe on a statue of the Blessed Virgin, therefore you're a saint. You can't do that. So, you know, you've got to, if we have no reference points to their space-time, other space-times in other worlds at all, then maybe they have a point. Although, of course, modern mathematics, Cantor and the whole idea of transfinite mathematics does say you can have mathematical relations, if nothing else, with something not in relation. I mean, that is just mind-blowingly revolutionary. Yeah, I mean, but also, well, I mean, I promise I'll just make one point. The fact is, you know, they're always assuming that, you know, these other space-times never interfere with ours, but they do. You know, sometimes you get a being from the world of darkness passing through our world, our no man's land, caught between the worlds of light and darkness, for their own purposes, and they're noticed or not. And of course, an emissary from the realms of light also comes through from time to time. And therefore we do have some sort of contact as human beings, no matter how frail and enfeebled that contact is, and what we make of that afterwards. So, oh my God, is that the old Manichae in me coming out? Too many words, too many words. Um, certainly, I think it's wise not to rule things out, and we've got to see who is a saint and who isn't. One last thing, I also like the Father Christmas story. Oh, I love Father Christmas. I love Father Christmas. It might even have been Odin. Someone was telling me a couple of years ago that, of course, before Coca-Cola got hold of him, his robe was green, not Coca-Cola coloured. I'm not no axe to grind with Coca-Cola. And he's the guy, of course, that would have brought in the original Yule log to keep the home warm. And he was the one floating around on the Yule, and the original reindeer would have been his. And Sleipnir, the eight-legged horse, would have been something like Rudolph. And you, oh my God, so it's him climbing up and going down chimneys. What a terribly depressing thought. But I love, dear Russian chums, I love St. Nicholas. Please stop. Don't stop inviting me to things. I will be nice to St. Nicholas from now on. I love our get-togethers at this time of year. Yes, I'm quite willing to admit you have a point that Christmas Day is actually on the 6th of January, and I'm now passing back to John Barnwell. But they're still speaking to me.
Well, yeah, I mean, think about it. Let's look at what we're talking about here. So December 6th is the feast of Saint Nicholas. And it's said that he passed away on that day in 343 AD, right? Which is an interesting number, but by the way, because if you look at 343, what is that? You look at your handle there, D Parry 777. Okay, 7 times 7 times 7 is 343. See, so your link to Nicholas is reaffirmed by your handle there. Of course, the 7 times 7 times 7 is I frequently make reference to the fact of that this is the fourth world in a series of 7 worlds. And each of those goes through 7 stages, which goes through 7 stages. So in the 3 principal streams that are involved of the process of 7 is 343 embodiments in a chain, is how it's referred to in the world of esotericism. And nonetheless, there are those that are critical of the idea of having numbers in relation to these things and all that, because like people like you're talking about, Paul Tillich, they're looking for something that's beyond their cognizance. And see, the thing is to become conscious, to become a human being, a complete human being. Toward the end of Earth evolution, will be aware of the physical, the etheric, the astral, and that whole thing will come to consciousness. It won't be something that's happening to you unconsciously. And an initiate or a saint, it varies because they're not all the same, because just like any other system of schooling, there's various grades and stages and proclivities and talents that are expressed and all of that. So you can look at what does Rudolf Steiner say about Aquinas. He said, well, he had a transformed etheric body, and so that he was able to become so articulate within the world of the etheric through his skill with language and thinking, which is very much important in that particular realm. Whereas St. Francis, whom you also mentioned, he's completely different in that his experience is a transformed astral body. So he had overcome everything within the realm of desire and sympathy, antipathy. And that's why the image of him sitting there with the birds, and there's a bird on his shoulder, and him calming down the wolf in the village, because he went and talked to the wolf, and the wolf was able to get him to understand what his problem was, and he went on his way once it became clarified. And so there's that, to bring clarity into the astral body is what he had done, and he had lived a very dissolute life up to that point. And then when he became through his transformation, where he became Saint Francis, that it was that higher vehicle that came to be within him of the transformed astral body. And of course, the transformation of the astral body is very much tied into the eightfold path of the 8 petals of the throat chakra. It's very important. So you have the various attributes that tie into being able to bring about clarity within that realm, right? That's the eightfold path of the Buddha. And I can't tell you the look on the Dalai Lama's cousin's face. I was talking to Gaelic Rinpoche, and I told him, I says, you know, Buddha's a Christian now. That got a great reaction from him. He's like, and so you have to see that there's this harmony that exists in things that are truly of the spirit. And that's why I really enjoyed Goethe's statements, which he made, which is really, really intriguing, because, again, Goethe is somebody that's so central to Rudolf Steiner and anthroposophy. I mean, Rudolf Steiner was the editor of Goethe's scientific writings, right? But you have Goethe in his writings. He says, "I have found no confession of faith to which I could ally myself without reservation. Now, in my old age, however, I have learned of a sect, the Hypsisterians, who hemmed in between heathens, Jews, and Christians, and declared that they would treasure, admire, and honor the best, the most perfect that might come to their knowledge, and inasmuch as it must have a close connection to the Godhead, pay it reverence. A joyous light thus beamed at me suddenly out of a dark age, for I had the feeling that all my life I had been aspiring to qualify as a Hypsisterian. That, however, is no small task, for how does one, in the limitations of one's individuality, come to know what is most excellent?" And so that's a quote of a Johann Wolfgang von Goethe regarding some of the misgivings that you express on frequent occasion of the various confessions, and their everybody has this thing, and it goes back to that old joke I told before. Like, guy dies and he goes up to heaven, and there's Saint Michael, and who leads him down this hallway, and there's all these rooms, and he's saying, "Oh, these are the Methodists over here," and then, "Oh, who's in that?" "Well, that's the Baptists," and they're going along to all these different. "Oh, there's the Unitarians. Yeah, they're all in there." And then you come to this one room, and the door is closed, and the guy says, "Well, why is the door closed?" He says, "Well, it's the Catholics. They think they're the only ones up here." And so, and you could shift it around, make any denomination you want fit that, but it's like these boundaries, and you mentioned Cantor, but just you blew by it. But Georg Cantor is really so important with his transfinite numbers, and the whole idea that developing into the idea of the open set. And that's very, very important, because in open set, that means that you're assuming that there's something beyond all of the pieces of the particular formulation that you're working with, that there could be input of which you're not aware, that's outside your particular set. And so that's one of the most critical aspects of actually science, true science, because you have to leave the door open. Again, I frequently make reference to the line that it's the crack where the light gets in. that's cited by our friend Leonard Cohen up in Canada, the late Leonard Cohen. Of course, and I was reminded by one of the sidebar commentaries that isn't that originally from Rumi? I believe so. I haven't had an opportunity to look it up, and I don't have all the Rumi books I used to have. So, but I'm sure I could find it on the internet somewhere. But the concept is far more important in what I'm trying to talk about here. So that when you get into trying to comprehend what sainthood is and initiates and all that, it has to do with human evolution. And supernatural, I don't really prefer that word, because it implies it's like it's some kind of P.T. Barnum-esque about the concept of that, and that there's, because it's the way it's been treated in the halls of science is haughty, like, oh, this is nonsense stuff. Like, I saw something the other day from somebody who I normally respect, but he's so attached to one particular window in this cathedral we call the universe, that he seems to think that the all the various orderings within occultism is some kind of trap of something. Yeah, it could be if it's working unconsciously. And that's the point, I guess, of this conversation and other things, is that the more we can make this stuff conscious, the better off we're going to be. And it doesn't require a belief. It's just a healthy suspension of disbelief is all one really needs.
I've got to get better at unmuting. Oh gosh,
A better word is super sensible.
super sensible is a great word. Oh, I'm getting too Christmassy at the minute. I don't know. They've all got their Christmas lights on near me. I haven't done anything yet. Crimbo is the vernacular way you refer to Christmas in this part of the world. Crimbo. What you were saying a minute ago actually reminded me of something. I'm working on a brief essay at the minute about mammon. You can't serve God and mammon, rather coming from the horse's mouth. And it struck me that nobody's really taking that conversation apart from any further than put first things first. I'm beginning to think there's a lot more to it than that, but I'm not going to say much about it in a minute, because all this stuff is going around in my head, and I've got to think about it a bit more. Oh, John, gosh. And certainly in terms of rereading, I'm beginning to look at Blavatsky again as well. I see more than syncretism in her. And I think Steiner is absolutely correct. I mean, what he was saying, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because you know much more about this than I do, is that, they almost leave to the side the Western mysteries. And I find it difficult to believe that somehow the sages of the Indus know more than us. I've always had trouble with that. Enlightenment must mean enlightenment. It doesn't mean you're a bit enlightened or you're just partially enlightened. It either is or it isn't. Like, back to that sort of Kierkegaardian either or. Listen, love, either you are or you're not. So I think we need a bit more hard thinking back in that direction at the minute. And I don't know. So if we have had enlightened people in this part of the world, which I'm absolutely certain we have, we can't dispense with what they've said and just ignore them, and then rush off to India and wear saffron robes like nothing's happened. Because it's disrespectful, and it's also deliberately ignoring part of the great mystery of what's going on. I mean, I love evolution. I love ideas of evolution. God, it's turning into a Unitarian haunting day. I mean, I spent years on the Unitarian circuit as a lay minister. The one trouble with Free Church, listen, Free Church Britons, is everything takes forever. We've got to speed up a bit. So part of the natural process was to be lay preacher and go around the circuit. I used to love it. London and the Southeast Circuit, you'd go to these spectacular old wooden churches, stone churches on a Sunday. You'd always be invited to lunch afterwards. And it made me mindful that Darwin wasn't an unbeliever. I mean, actually, he was from a family of Unitarians. He was probably a Unitarian himself. And certainly one of his uncles held up The Origin of Species in a pulpit and said, this is a great insight into the workings of nature. So did he go to Anglican church with his wife? No, he didn't, because he wasn't an Anglican. And therefore they make this big thing about that. I think there's the thread of truth with a capital T all the way through The Origin of Species, as well as beauty with a capital B. And we've got to start being a bit more sensible and adult about what that book is trying to say and why. I'll tell you what I've got in mind there. I'm actually an honorary member of the Cambridge Atheists. I don't really know how that happened. I don't really know how that happened. I think it was something to do with the fact I was so rude about the last tour Billy Graham had here. Yes, I was rude. I admit it. I didn't shut up at all. And a dear chum, I mean, I know Richard Dawkins. I don't know him well, but I know Richard Dawkins. My great chum was Raymond Tallis, who, of course, is a polymath by any description whatsoever. And we actually helped to launch in one of my old arts groups, Gruntlers, as it was called those days. We launched 2 of his books, and he was, I don't know, I just find him this extraordinary savant of knowledge, and he was always saying, "You're one of us." And it wasn't till later that the penny dropped. Oh my God, I'm one of the Cambridge Atheists. I think I'm an honorary member as opposed to anything else. It would be a bit odd if I turned him in my collar to one of their meetings. So I hope that doesn't go too far. And also, of course, it depends what you mean. Rather like saying theism, that word covers such a huge amount of territory. It's hardly surprising that atheism nearly covers as much as that. And by the time you've actually sat down and defined your terms, I'm sure nobody's any the wiser. And then you've got people like Wittgenstein. And, the last time I read Philosophical Investigations, by the time I got to the end, I couldn't work out whether he thought there was anything or not. The great admirer of St. Paul, who says the fact the world is a mystery and it doesn't point to a mystery. Hang on, that's a religious view. That's a religious view. Admit it. And he doesn't want to say that because it's unfashionable in Oxbridge. But I'm getting a bit tired of what's fashionable and not fashionable in Oxbridge. I mean, they seem to have nearly abandoned the classical Greek search for goodness, beauty, and truth. And now they're working on this sort of reductio ad absurdum, a reductive materialist view. And if it doesn't fit in with that, then somehow it's not what they want to talk about. I noticed none of them have been unwise enough to say that's obsolete or it's old, because of course they're perfectly aware that you can arrive at different sets of conclusions by other points of view. They're perfectly aware of that. So what they tend to do is say, we don't want to talk about that. We want to talk about these issues in our way, which is gutless and cowardly. And it was what Chuck Missler used to say. I'm not sure Chuck Missler would have liked me, but I like him. Wherever you are, Dr. Missler, I'm sure you're with the angels. And it was him that's, I promise I'm finishing. It was him. Oh my God, this is like the days of the pew again. Yeah. I mean, it was him that used to say, that they've given up that search and they've become a rival religion. And it took me ages to think, do I agree with that? But sadly, I do. Reductive materialism qua materialism is one way of looking at life, but it's the only one way amongst others. It's a rejection of Hegel, ultimately. Most intelligent Lutheran that ever lived, who wants to say basically, but no, there are multiplex ways of looking at it. Let's hold them in dialectic and see what happens. That's the cantor of modern philosophy. People tend to forget he had regular Sunday lunch with his minister, with his Lutheran minister. That seems to have gone missing nowadays. And it was even Foucault that at the end of his career, and I'm 2 minds about Foucault, I admit it. Yes, obviously he's brilliant. And I think Madness and Civilization is probably a highly significant book for the way things are going. But I noticed even, Mr. Arch Skeptic like Foucault says, I can't remember the volume, I'll have to look it up at the end. Maybe Hegel is waiting for us all at the end of the day. That is a bloody big admission. You can't help thinking, yes, he's right. And I notice even Chomsky, when he was talking to Foucault, they both ignored Hegel. Why? Why? Isn't that interesting? Because you end up with a series of spiritual conclusions. I'm shutting up. I'm shutting up. I need my sip of water anyway. Handing back to you, John.
Well, yes, Hegel. Most people at this point have heard some version of the Hegelian dialectic, but you shouldn't forget Fichte. And when Rudolf Steiner had met M, he just called him M, but it was the initiate that he was able to come to meet through the old herb gatherer Felix. And M said to Steiner toward the end of their relation, after which he didn't see him physically anymore, apparently, although we're not really sure about that, but it seems to be the case. He said to him to conquer the bull, you had to grab it by the horns, and to conquer the dragon, you had to pierce his skin, so that the bull is the bull like of the Luciferic bull of that whole realm, whereas the dragon is Ahriman. And so, and he recommended that he study the works of Fichte. And it's interesting because Fichte is not discussed as frequently as he should be, and there's not much on the current. You won't see people will make reference to Hegel, but they don't make reference to Fichte. Even though with Fichte you get that threefold thinking, feeling, and will thing, which again goes back to what I said in the very beginning. Initiations, it's like the blue lights. You got 3 degrees, and that's the way it is, because you've got Saturn, Sun, Moon, and then this is the 4th, Earth, and then Jupiter, Venus, Vulcan in the series. But we don't want to forget that our friend here, Reverend David, is an author. This is his book of inspired poetry, Caliban's Redemption. And here's his Shakespearean study, The Grammar of Witchcraft. And perhaps it could be considered his principal work, his magnum opus at this point, is the Mount Athos Inside Me, Essays on Religion, Swedenborg and the Arts. And it's much celebrated in scholarly circles. And those are all available on Amazon. And I would highly recommend checking them out. And for myself, my first book is The Arcana of the Grail Angel, the Spiritual Science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail, a study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner of the esoteric streams of Christianity that flowed from the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail to the Order of the Knights Templar and the True Rosicrucian Order. And it's some 640 pages. And this is the sequel, Arcana of Light on the Path. And they're both available on eBay. I wouldn't recommend finding them elsewhere because you'll get a much better price from me. But in both of them are included cosmological diagrams based on Rudolf Steiner's indications, and some diagrams that I encountered that were created by Ernfrid Pfeiffer, who was one of the direct students under Rudolf Steiner, along with Walter Johannes Stein and others, the Kaliskos. And he had an interesting group of young people around him. But yes, I'm glad that you're thinking of associating again with the Anthroposophical Society there. My books are available on eBay, and they're not hard to find if you know how to spell my name. And it's my Twitter handle right here, and then David has his right there. And we also, if you want to buy us a cup of coffee, I'm paypal.me/John Barnwell 888, and David is paypal.me/DPerry777. Both both of which are shown on the screen with our handles, except leave out as he, him, his. I'm not quite sure what all that means, but that's okay. There's a lot of things I don't understand, and I like it that way. At this point, we tend to ask for some kind of reverent benediction from Reverend David here so that we can kind of lift this up.
Gosh, I'll explain the he, him, his. In Metropolitan Community Church, we're trying to encourage the study of what gender pronouns actually mean. So I thought they're not having all the fun and I'll do it too. So I'm adding my preferred gender pronouns. I've noticed that the trans people I'm privileged to know, genuinely trans people, don't actually do it. They don't actually mention pronouns. So I'm not sure how far that's actually standing in loyal support. I don't know, but anyway, because we're a bit later this week. My dear friends, we're approaching the solstice. We're approaching Christmas. We're approaching that time when all of our societies remember in the darkest of nights that the light is slowly returning to us. It hasn't gone away. It's always been there, and it's reaching out to us yet again at a holy time. In the days ahead, when the lights darken for the last few days this year, remember that hope, love, tolerance, and wisdom can be reborn in our hearts, not necessarily at Christmas, that can happen at any time, but as a group and as a collective, as a church, as a synagogue, as a mosque. This is remembered at the Great Winter Festival, which I hope you'll celebrate with me in your own way. And may that glorious, divine, and holy light be with you now and always. Amen.
Amen. Yeah, and thank you so much, David. It's always a pleasure to share my early Sunday afternoons with you. And I want to thank everybody for stopping by. And the information regarding our books and everything else is beneath the video on YouTube and on Facebook. Want to look into anything further. And so with that, I bid you all adieu and happy feast of St. Nick.